happy to be here. All the preparation, you were so nervous preparing, but once you're here, it feels wonderful. My goal is to inspire you by describing an experience in which the teaching team and students were able to connect the dots among many of the 21st century, or shall I say, timeless skills that we are trying to teach them right now. What I'm describing begins and endures with a desire to form an exchange between middle school students and the Cochiti Pueblo, one of several Kara-speaking peoples who live along the Rio Grande in north-central New Mexico. To make the connection, we partnered with the World Leadership School, an organization with extensive experience in cultural exchange around the world. Ross Winter of the World Leadership School had previously sat with the elders of the Pueblo, that's the governing body, to introduce the idea of a partnership. As you might imagine, the elders were wary of opening their door too wide. They were interested, but wary. Ross suggested that we introduce ourselves indirectly through a service project with the local public elementary and middle school where Cochiti children were enrolled. So, we forged ahead, beginning with the first days of school last fall. Students' academic endeavors were inspired by the impending real-world, real-work aspects of camping at the lake with friends, engaging in a service project, and meeting the Cochiti face-to-face. They studied the region's geology and ecology. They read literature such as Bless Me Ultima to develop a sense of the body and soul of north-central New Mexico, a uniquely beautiful, beautiful environment. They learned how the doctrine of discovery, a concept in public international law, has been applied for 6 centuries by governments across the Americas to invalidate indigenous rights. Throughout the pre-trip prep, we coach students to understand that this was not about giving to the less fortunate, which is sometimes the connotation of a service project. It was not about helping others. We might do that. Rather, it was seeing life through a different lens. It was learning what we have in common with the Cochiti and how we're different. The elders were wary of us and the exchange because they were committed to reviving their native language Karas and to strengthening waning traditions among their children. They had no reason to believe that we would contribute to that based on their history with non-Indigenous people. Also, in consideration of the Catholic Church's historic support of the doctrine of discovery, partnering their young with St. Mary's Academy required some assurances. Students somewhat understood why the aforementioned reasons would cause the elders to be cautious, but what moved them to genuine empathy was learning about the radical efforts made in the last century by the U.S. government to try and assimilate Native Americans. In some cases, Cochiti children were removed from their families and sent to boarding schools. In other cases, entire families were relocated to large cities. Every one of their customs and traditions came under attack. The clothes they wore, their Pueblo laws, dances, feasts, the teaching of their native language, Karas, became illegal. We then asked students to examine 2 major events in recent Cochiti history that were potentially more threatening to their survival than the U.S. government's assimilation program. I want to apologize for describing 2 very complicated, multifaceted, and emotional conflicts in a simple and brief way. It's hardly fair to the people who were involved in that, but we have a short time here, and what I'm trying to do is give you a sense of how we backfilled our interactions with the Cochiti, and also how we provided students with hooks so that they could evaluate justice from multiple perspectives and also inform their empathy. Both events that I'll talk about involved the loss of land, and both events were connected behind the scenes by business deals, of which the Cochiti had no knowledge. In the first case, the elders, in disarray after World War II, and pressured by younger members of the Pueblo who were educated outside of it, agreed to the sale of a large portion of their land to developers. On that land, a resort town, the construction of a resort town was begun for recreationalists and commuters. The Cochiti soon realized, uh-oh, we're on the losing end of a deal once again with non-indigenous people. Only after hard-fought legal battles and great expense were they able to regain ownership and limit the expansion of the town of Cochiti Lake. As significant, as difficult as the town of Cochiti Lake was and is, a more significant anguish was the construction of one of the world's largest dams on native Cochiti land that was appropriated by the U.S. government. The construction of Cochiti Dam, while promising control of the errant Rio Grande, destroyed ancestral summer homes, flooded, submerged acres and acres of prime agricultural land that the Cochiti had farmed for centuries. Cherished places of worship that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers had promised would be safeguarded were desecrated. To add salt to the wound, when the lake was filled, seepage occurred, creating wetlands that ruined surrounding cultivations. The dam destroyed the Cochiti's agrarian way of life. You can imagine, I think, right now, how this particular history combined, connected with face-to-face meetings with the Cochiti, truly motivated that deeper learning we wanted students to attain. Eventually, compromise was reached between the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Cochiti, who for years could not be in the same room together. So bitter were they with each other. The U.S. government made a formal apology, and the two sides began working together. Cochiti elder and former governor of the Pueblo, Regis Pecos, writes, "The forced relationship provided opportunities for learning and working together after years of litigation and the worst kind of adversarial and antagonistic relationship. Through this process, we would write a different ending. Together, we achieved the impossible." Wow. Now that's a message we wanted our students, every one of them, to take away with them. The message of working together to achieve the impossible, as well as the recognition of how important humility and forgiveness were to reaching that agreement. As you might imagine, during our time at Cochiti Lake Campground, there were many surprises. One of the, surprises, as you know, those are the tests and the gifts of experiential education. One of the first surprises occurred the day of arrival in late afternoon. Students they had oriented themselves, set up their tents, and were preparing the evening meal when the wind picked up. No, the wind picked up. It picked up 2 tents and threatened to take more. It just came out of nowhere. Dinner prep waited. We ran around with our hammers and our rocks, and we secured all the stakes. You know, it was followed, I have to say, by the most beautiful sunset of the week. Another great surprise. And yes, our burgers had a sandy crunch. There were many more surprises, much more pleasant. We one surprise was we were invited to share a traditional Cochiti meal of chili stew, star cookies, and oven bread with the senior citizens of the Pueblo. That was so very special. And the visits to our campsite of Cochiti artists. One of the most moving surprises was our meeting with Head Ranger Mark Rosacker and Ranger Tim Bouchain. They had their full uniforms on, and they gave us tips on how to live with the rattlers, scorpions, stinging centipedes, and tarantulas. And their knowledge of the dam's operation and its construction was extensive. That's not what they talked about. These two men really spoke from their hearts. We couldn't have scripted their interactions with students more dramatically to reinforce the message of working together to achieve the impossible. Mark Rosacker, the head ranger, he just passionately and eloquently spoke to the students and asked them to examine their life's purpose and to value their kinship with all living things. Where do you think he got that? He used the word stikende, which is a Native American word that encompasses how all of us are related, how we are relatives, and we're relatives with every living thing. Both men modeled what we hoped for ourselves, a humility and a sensitivity that had allowed them to learn from the indigenous people they worked alongside of. Their parting advice was key to the students' diplomatic success. They explained to them that if they listened and observed while with the Cochiti, really listened and observed, stories would be told. If they asked a lot of questions and were distracted and distracting, there would be only silence. We educators must work together to achieve the impossible. In spite of all the hard-to-move traditions and everything that is pushing back, we have a responsibility to prepare our students to engage the future with informed empathy, a collaborative spirit, and a commitment to justice and respect for the earth and all that it holds. The Cochiti experience took students outside of the building's walls, provided ample opportunities for critical thinking skills to be developed, and allowed them to walk a little bit in the shoes of the Cochiti. Let's do more of that. So, in conclusion, I'll share 3 post-trip quotes from students' journals. He began beating the drum and singing low in the Keres language. As he began to play, it brought peacefulness in me. I felt almost trapped in time. You could see true sadness in the chief's eyes when he said they were losing their language. I learned that doing community service isn't what you have to do. It's something you want to do. Let's achieve the impossible. Thank you.